My name is Patricia Joan Davis. I used to be Patricia Joan Martin before I was married. I was born on St Barnabas Day, 1939, and so I've been associated with St Barnabas ever since, with just one or two breaks for various reasons, you know, during the actual war itself and after when I went to university and came back again. But I was christened in what we're going to call the Lambert Hall. Now, Canon Lambert was the person who carried out the service, and I have a photograph of me with my parents, in my parents' arms, with the new church being built in the background. We then had a little break because my father was away at the war, and my mother was new to Gloucester and didn't know many people. She was from Northern Ireland. But after the war, I started going to Sunday school from the age of about 6. We had a large Sunday school, which was held in the Lambert Hall. There were about 50 or more children, and we were split up into groups so that for our instruction. And the lady in charge was Miss Arnold. And this went on, as I say, till about the age of 12, I suppose. I was also a member of what we used to call the King's Messengers. This was a group of girls, of course. You'll see from what we were doing. We used to meet in the choir vestry every Friday, and we worked hard from 6 to 7, beavering away at embroidering tray cloths, tablecloths, handkerchiefs. This was all so that we could produce something to have a stall at the mission fete, which they always held in the autumn. Miss Arnold was initially in charge, and then Mrs. Violet Blackford took over and kept an eye on us and kept us on the right lines. But at the end of our hour, we always gathered round the piano over here, and we had some prayers, and then we always sang Jesus Shall Reign Where'er the Sun. So that was a most enjoyable time because we could chat away while we were working. In those days, we used to have a full choir of boys and men. All the choir stalls behind me were absolutely full of boys and men. And they were rehearsed under the organist and choir master, Mr. Eddie Parsons. Mr. Parsons was a fantastic person with music. And Gloucester, St Barnabas was well known in Gloucester in those days for its church music. The choir boys used to be examined by the School of Church Music, and those that passed the examination used to wear a ribbon round their neck with a medallion on the end. And every so often, I think it must have been at least once a month, if not more frequently, it just depended what festival was on in the church, they would sing an anthem. And if you weren't here, certainly for the big festivals at Easter Evensong, and the Christmas Carol concert, of course, plus the Harvest Festival, if you hadn't reached church by 6:15, I'm afraid you were put to sit right up in the Lady Chapel, which you could see very little from, of course. So the idea was that you came early to make sure that you could have a decent seat. In those days, Mr. Parsons always played from the organ loft because the organ was in commission then. Sermons, of course, were always preached from the pulpit up on my left. You never had sermons from the chancel steps in those days. And evensong was the most popular service. We used to go to Holy Communion once a month at 8 o'clock in the morning, but we always attended evensong at 6:30. I'm afraid, because we had to have a journey of 15 minutes uphill, we were probably one of the last people in on an evensong, and so consequently we used to sit about 2 or 3 rows from the front, And I think this is probably why, even now, I automatically go to that position in church whenever I come in. And of course, we wanted to be opposite the pulpit so that we could see the preacher clearly. But that was very happy days, and we used to have, people buzzing round afterwards, chatting and so on. We didn't have any refreshments in church, not in those days, but nevertheless there was the happy chatter, as you might well expect. And of course the ladies, even children, I always did, we always wore hats. You wouldn't think of coming to church if you were a lady without a hat. So that was always de rigueur. We used to have gift days once a year, and the vicar would sit at the back of the church with a table in front of him. And the idea of these gift days initially was to supplement the vicar and the curate's stipends. I think that latterly it was just a gift day for giving money to the church. So he would sit there patiently, it was always on a Saturday, and wait for his grateful parishioners to turn up. At Easter time, I remember, my mother used to help with the flowers in church, and I used to go along to help her. We used to go on Easter Saturday morning. And one thing I remember vividly about doing this is that we used to walk up with a group of us, of the ladies who were going to arrange the flowers. We used to walk up to what is now Hillborough Road houses. In those days, there was a big orchard there. It was owned by Mrs. Stuart Smith, who was a widow of one of our founders. And she would say, now come up and pick whatever you want, because in the orchard there were masses and masses of lovely daffodils bobbing about in the breeze. And so we would go up, gather as many daffodils as we felt we needed, come back to the church, and then while my mother and the other ladies were arranging the big floral displays, I was set to work with others on the east garden. And it was always built as a hill with the 3 crosses on the top. And we used to use those little glass pots, I don't think you can see them now, which used to contain fish paste. They were the little ones. And of course they fitted into the slots in the hill quite nicely, and you could have your little grape hyacinths and primroses and so on. So it looked very decorative when you'd finished. I was prepared for confirmation at the age of 15. The confirmation classes were held by the Reverend Harry Clark, a most popular and cheerful man with a northern accent. And we used to meet on a Friday in the vicar's vestry for our instruction. And then we were confirmed just before Easter, so that Easter Sunday could be our first communion. We could take our first communion then. And I was confirmed by Bishop Woodward, who was then the Bishop of Gloucester. Yes, we didn't actually work through the catechism as such, but we had a very good instruction there. And one thing that, not really connected to it, but Reverend Clark and his wife Pat used to invite us from time to time up to his house for tea. In those days, the curate had a house on Finley Road, and so it was easy to find. And he would have a little group of us from the confirmation class up there, just to sort of get to know us, I think, more than anything else. But I don't really remember an awful lot. The trouble is, I've been to quite a few confirmations since, my daughters and grandchildren, that my own confirmation doesn't really stand out, apart from the fact, in those days, I wore a white dress. We didn't have veils or anything like that, but on the whole, the boys wore, white shirts and grey trousers, and the girls tended, not all, but they tended to wear white dresses. The one real outstanding activity that did take place for several years, we used to have a very active young wives group. And for several Christmases, young wives put on a really super-duper nativity play. It lasted for about an hour and a half. All the members took part. If they weren't actually characters in the nativity scene, they sang in the choir. There were about a dozen or 15 who sang in the choir, grouped around the piano here. But it took the place, there was a narrator, and this is Molly Jones, who had a fantastic resonant voice. She hardly needed a microphone at all. You know, she could reach the back of the church quite easily. And she stood up at the ambo to my left here, and she read passages from the Bible. And during that time, the story was told by the characters as they came into the church in various parts. And great care was taken to have as authentic a costume as possible. There was no question of sort of a tea towel around your head or anything like that. It was properly costumed. And as I say, all the members of the Young Wives took part, and some of their offspring, recruited as angels or pages. I remember my sister was an angel with great big wings, and I was a page to my mother, who was a king, and I had to carry a gold casket down. It started in darkness and we came down the aisle, you know. But in the meantime, while that sort of thing was happening, the choir used to sing a variety of different carols which illustrated the story that was being told. Because we had a narrator, there was no need to learn any words or anything. It was all mimed, and that worked very well indeed. But it was a lovely occasion. It was produced by Marjorie Williams, who some of you may remember, Nan Perry, that was her sister. I don't think Marjorie was quite so well known, because when she got married, she went to live elsewhere. But Nan used to live in Pembury Road. And we used to rehearse, not just once or twice, all regularly, all through the autumn. And then when it was put on, again, the church was absolutely packed with extra seats at the back of the church. And it was always very well received. It was a super nativity play. I must admit, I may be a bit prejudiced, but I haven't seen one quite as good as that since, I don't think. But I was so relieved after a couple of years. I graduated to become a member of the choir rather than being a page. But unfortunately, my voice has really gone to pot since then, so I wouldn't dare be a member of the choir now. I was married in St Barnabas on April the 15th, 1966. And my elder daughter was baptised here the Easter of 1968. And then both daughters were married here, the elder one in August 1994 and the younger one in August 1997. Both daughters are musical. And they used to put on, in their teens, they used to put on concerts to raise money for the church. There were quite a number of concerts. And my husband, whose name was Les, used to accompany them on the piano. Fiona played the oboe and Alison the flute, and they both played the piano as well, so, you know, they had solo pieces. But rather amused us, the very first time one of the concerts was advertised in the church newsletter. It was advertised this concert was going to be put on to raise money for the church with Les, Alison and Fiona Davis. And Fiona's friend from school said, "That's rather pretentious, isn't it? Lay Davies." But it wasn't, of course, it was my husband's name. But they used to enjoy those concerts. And my mother was a very avid ticket seller. So we used to have a very good congregation, well, audience in those days. Later on, when after yes, I'd had a break from here because we went. My husband was in the forces, so he went all over the place after I'd left university and then got married. And we ended up in Germany several times. When we came back from Berlin in 1978, we settled down in Gloucester, and we've been in Gloucester ever since. So as we were in Furwood Drive, not very far away, I automatically came back to St Barnabas. And the girls used to come to Sunday school, again still in the Lambert Hall, but this time not with Miss Arnold as the supervisor, but with John and Mary Price. And they were very happy doing that. In those days, the Sunday school was always in the afternoon. I mean, it was always 3 p.m. for me, and the same with the girls too. And they were also in the Brownies and the Guides, and they were very happy there. But when we came back, the first thing I noticed in church was rather a large, ugly wooden organ, which was at the back of the church where the children's corner was, and up until then, the children's corner had always been. But the big organ up in the loft had packed in, and this was our replacement. It was a pity in many ways, not just because we'd lost the children's corner, but also because it's blocked out the lovely stained glass memorial that was put at the back of the church by Mrs. Jennings of Jennings the printer, because her son was killed in a I think it was a cycling accident on the way to school, and this is what she'd given to the church in his memory. And fortunately, in the time of Reverend Crisp in Pemberton, he was keen on music and he wanted a proper organ, and so he encouraged us to raise the money, and we managed to buy the organ, which we've now got over here. And then, of course, the corner was restored, and we could again admire the stained glass window, particularly when it was lit up, because it does light up, it's possible. So it was a much better outcome. Oh yes, it was coming home all right, you know. My parents were still here. My father was a lay reader here for 40 years. So, I mean, the connection was there all the time. And occasionally when we came on holiday, obviously we came up to church. So yes, the connection never really was gone completely, because I always had news of what was going on in St Barnabas, even though we weren't around. So that was really nice. I was so put out when latterly the Gloucestershire Symphony Orchestra has been holding concerts in here, and one of the first concerts I was standing in the queue to pay for my ticket, and the person in front of me was chatting, obviously a member of the orchestra, chatting to a friend and saying, oh yes, the acoustics are rather nice, but it's a horrible building, really ugly building. So I'm afraid I had to turn around and say, I'm awfully sorry, but this is not an ugly building. It's a lovely building, you know. And he looked a bit taken aback, you know, that people would think that it was an attractive building. But it's so light and airy, you know, it really is super, rather than having to sit behind a pillar, you know, and dodge around to try and see what was going on or to take part. Yes, when my parents had their golden wedding, the two girls put on a concert in